You mentioned
Yeah.
you've worked agency side and also client side. Which do you prefer?
I think where I am now probably tells you that straight away. I'm definitely more of a client side than an agency side. I think like I can get more ingrained in detail, and I've got more say of when or how stuff get implemented client side than I always had when I was agency side. Like, obviously it depends on the client, it depends on the website you're working for, who it is, the industry, the niche that you're in whatever. Like some clients that we used to have, would give us full access to everything and say, just go ahead and crack on and do everything you need to do, basically. But then when you're in-house somewhere, like especially with an e-com brand like I am now, like I say, we're implementing buying and merchandising teams, we're implementing trade teams to help them understand when products should go on promotion, etc. We're ingrained fully in everything from like, if there's an implementation of a new tool, how that needs to be implemented from day one before it even gets to the point where they chance to mess it up when it's on site, because it can have a massive impact. So it's I feel like I'm more ingrained in the conversation, ingrained in the site if I'm in-house than I always was as an agency, like outside. There's only a certain sway that you tend to get from an agency point of view that you can get across. If it's like, well, again, probably depend on the size nowadays, but it's been a few years since I've worked for an agency side that's even touched a site that is anywhere near like, big enough to have in-house teams, for instance. So, it's probably a different story for some, but a lot of the time I feel like it's probably a bit of freedom and say that you get with in-house that tends to work a bit better.
Yeah, and it feels more like more as a marketer, right? Being in-house. I always find that being agency side, doing SEO, agency side, you essentially end up being a salesperson. That is the ultimate goal. Like everything you're doing, your training, everything is designed for you to bring in more clients and or retain clients. So it's all about sales. Whereas client side, I feel as an SEO, you're a marketer. You have to work with the different departments, especially if you want to have things implemented.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. Don't get me wrong, I do a lot of internal training. I do a lot of not necessarily training, but knowledge sharing in a way with a lot of the teams. So like when it comes to anything tech related, for instance, I'll start from right at the bottom for the specific problem. So why it's a problem, how it gets it, how it's become a problem, what Google does from Google's side, how Google sees it as well as the customer side seeing it. And it's important to give them a view of essentially what the customer is seeing, but why Google is also a customer in a different manner. So I tend to look at Google as a customer, but even if it's a computer-based customer, it's still a customer. So without Google ranking your site in the right way, customers won't see it in the same volume. So it's kind of an amplifier as a customer at the same time. So it's always good to educate them from Google's side what the technical part is and Google seeing, how Google uses something, how Google uses that function, understands the URLs, parameters, whatever it may be. And then also from the client side, how that's then how the interaction is then having the knock-on effect for it. And then when you're constantly training and teaching and knowledge sharing with the internal teams, or at least what I tend to find is that as soon as they've got any query whatsoever, no matter how daft or stupid it is, they'll come to you and just clarify what their own thinking is of it, if it has an impact, if it's not going to have an impact. And that's you've got not only does that show that you've then got that sort of mutual respect, but it's constantly the forefront of their mind. And that's a massive point with a lot of things from like ecom, where you've got pressures on conversion rate. It may fluctuate and go down, and then they're looking at how they can improve conversion rate. So they might want to add in a new third-party tool somewhere, like a Tagstar or something, and it might have a knock-on effect down the line. But if they don't know there's potential of having a knock-on effect by them not having that knowledge and that information in the first place. It has a big impact. So it's an interesting one to do, but you definitely do be able to get ingrained in more teams. Like I think gradually over the years, I'm starting to become a bit more of like a product manager or a product owner, rather than like a normal SEO, like to some extent. Might sound like a silly concept also, but it's probably due to the size of the site that I'm working on that it's kind of, the hands-on stuff, the stuff you would normally go to do, like add content, change your internal linking, go and change your meta titles and target keywords slightly differently, get content put in the right places and sort out that internal linking. Those kind of normal on-page and in-page things, we do that, and we do that as a business all of the time. But I don't overly ingrain myself in the nitty-gritty of that point, but more about the whole bigger picture and the structural side of how that internal linking network is going to work, rather than the singular page stuff at the bottom level. So therefore, I'm kind of not taking myself away from the day-to-day, but at the same time, kind of managing it as a bigger task, if that makes sense. So I feel like it is kind of coming more of a product manager role for a very specific area than a typical SEO nowadays.
It's funny you mentioned that.
It's a strange realization when you get to that.
It's funny you say that, because I know a handful of brands these days that specifically have a project manager who is an SEO. So their title, instead of the typical, let's say, SEO manager, their title is SEO project manager. And I found that just to be amazing, because it shows how much SEO is influencing businesses and brands across the globally, I should say. It's a big difference. This right there shows the big difference between an SEO who works client side and an SEO who works agency side. Because what you just mentioned right there, you won't necessarily have that point of view if you're an SEO agency side, but being client side, you have to have this point of view, because you have to have this evangelism going on, letting all the different departments know that what they do, as long as it has an impact, or as long as they affect the website, what they do can and will affect SEO performance, which impacts the overall business performance. And it takes SEO away from being just a silo to being something that's well understood and respected across the business.
Almost certainly. It goes further than that. Like I mentioned earlier on about, data playing a huge part in not only what we see and, the rankings that we have and the trend data that we see, but how we can use some of the SEO data and the concepts that a typical SEO internal linking and stuff would do in order to work, in order to be able to give people different data insights for the entire business. So again, back to, I got up at MeasureFest a couple of weeks ago at Brighton SEO and did an entire talk around like product and category visibility on a website. Like the kind of, I guess the point and the sentiment I was trying to make there is, when you walk into a physical store to buy an item of clothing, you'll typically walk into that shop. You might know what you want, but you'll walk around and you'll see all of the products in that store to see if there's anything else that you're likely to pick up and buy while you're there. However, with an e-com site, you'll never do that, because 90% of the products, it'll sit in a category that you can't easily navigate to unless you come in via a direct search query or, do an on-site search or wherever. Or you can't even navigate to categories in the same way. Like, half the e-com sites I've worked on over the last few years have had anything between sort of, probably 2,000 and 10,000 categories. There's no way you're going to click through 10,000 categories when you're going doing a casual browse on your mobile phone at home.
Right.
You're just not going to do that. So the concept becomes very different, because what you then don't realize is that you have, probably 80%, 90% of your product catalog that isn't easily accessible or findable to a customer, unless they come in through that little silo that is the category or the search term that they searched for. They might not find the other ones on site. So say if you come in for, trying to buy a pair of ripped skinny jeans, for instance, you might not know that we have sportswear on site, because you might not easily be able to get from one to the other quite quickly without using an on-site searcher. And it's a strange concept, because when you actually think about that over the life cycle of products in a period of time, you end up, it's like, how you end up with products going into sale or going on discount, or, how much volume of products do you need to buy? How many items do you need per category? there's loads of things that come into that about how visible those products are and how visible those categories are. Because if a customer can't find them and Google can't navigate to them, and they end up orphaned products or categories that there's no internal linking to, you're never going to rank for them, therefore you're never going to sell them, therefore they end up going into sale.
Yeah.
And then you wonder whether it's product failure or not, and it actually might not be. So then there's loads of concepts in the background through this data, this internal linking network that you've got, and this stuff that you can do that you can actually have massive influences on what happens on the day-to-day front end through buying and merchandising and trading the website in a certain way, etc., etc. It's I find it more of a challenge, and I find it more interesting typically to do that and get ingrained in that sort of level of I don't know, data
Marketing.
and day to day than then the standard, like, writing 10,000 title tags for I don't know I don't know. I was going to say like a furniture client or something you've got from an in-house point of view. Like it's just a completely different concept. But like that's the sort of job that you'll get from as an SEO from an agency side. You'll have you'll need to refresh title tags and you'll need to look at some indexation problems. Very different when you look at it from an in-house point of view and where you can ingrain yourself and make a difference. It's a very different concept anyway.